Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I'm here with my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, NHL 94 playoff champion.
Oh, yes. And the reason that you are mentioning that odd piece is because in this episode of our season on the films of 1996, we're talking about Jason's pick. Jason, what did you pick?
I picked Swingers, the first film written by Jon Favreau and starring Favs and Vince Vaughn, and directed by Doug Liman, a filmmaker we both still like and think is a little underrated, I think, overall.
Yeah, maybe. He's uneven, let's say. We'll probably talk more about that later. But
yeah, that's somewhat of what's fascinating about him.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. But Swingers was his debut, so this could have been a
not true, Josh. Not true.
Was it not?
He made a film in 1994 called Getting In about I think it had like Doug Ray Scott or something, and basically it was about this dude who wants to get into medical school, and like three people are ahead of him to get in, and he finds convenient ways to have them have accidents.
Is this a comedy?
Yeah, I think it's like one of those Dead Man on Campus type style movies or whatnot. So,
oh wow!
But this is definitely the movie that propelled him to stardom.
Yeah, I was not aware of that other movie. That's a failure on my part in terms of the research. So I'm glad you stepped in on that. Have you seen that movie?
No, but you know we love being completists here at Awesome Movie Year. So don't be surprised if it comes up on my Letterboxd one of these days. Which, quick plug, go for Jason. Follow me on Letterboxd.
Oh yeah, follow me on Letterboxd too at Signal Bleed. Letterboxd is great. So Swingers, though, was certainly, like you said, a breakout for Doug Liman, a breakout for Vince Vaughn, and for Jon Favreau, who wrote it as well as starred in it. It was a decent success for a small movie like this. It grossed $4.6 million on its budget of only $200,000. Although I was looking, and you never know if you can trust some of these Wikipedia sources, but supposedly it was sold to Miramax, which distributed it, for $5 million. So
yes,
from that perspective, maybe it wasn't as successful as they were hoping it would be. But certainly this is a home video, like, runaway success.
Right. If I may jump in here, Josh.
Oh, please do. This is your pick.
Yeah. And because of that, I know a lot of the stories. I've followed the stories. I used to actually love the show Dinner for Five that Jon Favreau had on IFC, and he would tell some of these stories. Yes, so you're right. It was sold for $5 million, right? So if you consider that they made it for $200,000, couldn't get into Sundance, packed out their own theater on Fairfax with friends, and then some buyers and everything, sold it for $5 million. And then it became a worldwide, pretty big sensation. They toured the world with it, other festivals and everything. And then, like you said, became a huge, huge hit on home video. I think overall a win-win for everybody. And, we're always rooting for wins for Harvey Weinstein here on. That's a joke.
Course,
clearly, that's a joke. But,
yes.
Hey, we do admit he did have a magic touch of sorts in the 90s when picking independent films.
Yes.
So, yes.
Yeah. I mean, as we've done these seasons on years from the 90s, it's pretty much impossible to avoid the Harvey Weinstein presence. And he certainly had an eye for these films.
A lot of women feel that way, too.
So I walked right into that there, didn't I? All I meant is that, like, yes, this is a huge success for the filmmakers to sell it for that level of a budget, but it maybe wasn't as much of a success for Miramax right away. Although I'm sure once you factor in the home video sales and rentals and whatever, it was a huge success.
Yeah.
And certainly was a big pop culture thing. And it actually, we had mentioned when we talked about Bottle Rocket that Wes Anderson had won this Best New Filmmaker award at the MTV Movie Awards, which I remembered as kind of putting that movie on my radar. And this, I think, because it came out in late 1996, and then the next year at the 1997 MTV Movie Awards, it got that same award, the Best New Filmmaker award for Doug Liman. And that I can't remember for sure, but that might have been something that put it on my radar as well. And I think, as we talked about in Bottle Rocket, that is the only MTV Movie Award that goes to anything for artistic merit.
Yes, we agree that should be the entire MTV Movie Awards show. That the filmmaker's trophy or the best known filmmaker, and then that should be it. It should be like a 4-minute. You could watch it on IGTV, and that's the whole show. So.
Yes. Well, since you've done this research, what background info did you want to share on this film?
I mean, I think, like we said, that's a huge success story right away of it not getting into the festival, into Sundance, which was considered the be all end all at the time, and still going on to such heights. Favreau wrote the script in 2 weeks based on kind of real life situations from him moving out from Chicago to LA. He met Vaughn on the set of Rudy when they were both kind of background players, and Ron Livingston, who we like, who plays Rob, is, that kind of relationship is real too, because they moved out to get similar times. They were both in the Improv Olympic in Chicago together. So there's a lot of real life background that they've translated over. And of course, the script, which they ended up making for $200,000, actually did very well. Like, studios wanted to make it. Doug Liman was going to be attached to direct it, and that would have been fine. And but they kept giving notes like, well, you should make Trent a woman, Trent being Vince Vaughn, or you should cut the Vegas sequence, or it needs more violence, or you should cast Johnny Depp or Chris O'Donnell or Jason Priestley, or you should get rid of words like money and baby and honey, like notes that would have clearly killed this entire film. So a success on its own, in spite of all these idiots telling it not to be.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, those notes, I mean, I think you're right. Those all would have been bad for the movie, but I can sort of see where like some Hollywood douchebag is coming from with those notes, except for the idea that it should be more violent. I don't understand that at all. It's not the kind of movie that this is at all. We'd have to, I don't know. That's a weird note to me, but obviously it's good that they didn't take any of those notes and that they made the movie the way they wanted to make it.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I could think of was when you said that there was like that kind of subgenre in the 90s about like cool subcultures, nightlife cultures that had there were like a lot of movies based around them that involved violence, if we look back on that. So
yeah,
maybe that's it.
I guess that's true. The kind of wave of post Pulp Fiction movies that were about these kinds of characters, I guess, who are the sort of hipsters with the pop culture references, but they're also like criminals. But
yeah,
it's so far from what this movie is that it would had to been like rewritten from scratch in order to make that work. So good that they didn't do that. This movie was mostly well reviewed, although it's funny, the reviews that I found are all kind of like begrudgingly positive about this movie. And especially watching Siskel and Ebert talk about it, and they gave it 2 thumbs up, but they both said it was, quote, a marginal thumbs up. And Ebert, basically his entire discussion on the TV show is about how he would not walk more than 3 blocks to see this movie, which was the distance that they had to walk to get to the screening that they went to. So wow. They seem to be almost like trying to undermine it while being positive about it.
That's a weird stand to take.
It is a weird stand to take. And I mean, he's trying to, because I forget, earlier in that episode, they talk about Get on the Bus, which I think is a Spike Lee movie, kind of a forgotten one, which they really, really liked. And so he's like, well, I want to put this in context, and how that movie is so much better, which he also gave thumbs up to. But I feel like that's not necessary. People understand.
Yeah, I've seen Get on the Bus. It's all right. Not one of the best, not one of the worst, but this is a better film.
Yeah, no, that's fair. So in his written review, which is also marginally positive, Ebert said, they say you should write about what you know. Doug Liman, who directed Swingers, and Jon Favreau, who wrote it, obviously know a lot about young guys in Hollywood sitting around in coffee shops talking about making it in show business. If you had entered that Best Western coffee shop a year or 2 ago, you might actually have seen them planning this movie. It's not a terribly original idea, but then, as one of the guys says, everybody steals from everybody. This observation is closely followed by shots cheerfully stolen from Scorsese's Goodfellas and Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs. The movie is sweet, funny, observant, and goofy with a small g, which means you don't get paid, but at least you don't have to wear the suit. which is a reference to Ron Livingston's character playing Goofy at Disneyland and doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But that's how his review ends. So again, it seems like he's almost reluctant to praise the movie, but he feels like he has to.
Yeah, maybe he didn't really relate to it.
Maybe not. Although it's funny. I mean, we've talked about this in past episodes where Ebert is always more than willing to wax rhapsodic about his younger days when he was out there picking up ladies. So I'm sort of surprised that he doesn't mention that. This seems like the perfect opportunity.
I mean, this came out when we were teenagers and I already related to it, not like the swing dancing in the nightclubs, but, sitting at diners, talking about movies, hoping we can one day make it. All that stuff was very clear to me at the age of 16 or so.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the strength of this movie is that it feels natural to what these kinds of people would be doing and talking about. Owen Gleiberman in Entertainment Weekly was much more positive. He gave it an A. He said, working from Favreau's exuberantly witty script, director Doug Liman snakes his camera through parties and back alley lounges, staging sly visual satirical allusions to Reservoir Dogs, Goodfellas, and Saturday Night Fever. He captures something hilarious and touching, a new attitude of wistful modesty on the part of young macho cruisers, a recognition that what works today is raw testosterone in a velvet glove. And then later, I liked his observation here about Vince Vaughn. If Swingers has a scene stealer, though, it's Vince Vaughn, who I predict is going to be a very big star. Spooky, cool, sexy, like the young Christopher Walken. He makes Trent a rudely magnetic Arrested Development case, the spirit of the peacock in all its fearless vanity. I did like the idea that at this time that Vince Vaughn was going to become this kind of sex symbol, which is very much not what happened with Vince Vaughn.
Yeah, but as we know and talk about in the legacy, they sent this movie to Spielberg so they could get the rights to the Jaws music, and he watched it and before this was anything, and he's like, Vince Vaughn, huh? I'm going to cast him in the Jurassic Park sequel. So, he definitely was magnetic on screen, and this made him, man. This made him, baby.
And that's one of the things that I was fascinated by watching this movie now, having not seen it since 1996, is that Vince Vaughn and Jon Favreau not only do they look really, really young in this movie, but they look really good. Like they're really like good looking guys. And, as we're saying, like the idea that Vince Vaughn would become this sex symbol definitely is not what happened, and certainly not Favreau either. And these guys, they're very successful. This movie worked out for that. They did not age very well. I will say.
I mean, look, Favreau definitely went the dad bod route. And Vince Vaughn maybe had some issues with other things, but his energy really explodes off the screen in this. But also, I want to give Vince Vaughn a little credit, because if you look at his filmography, not to say he's made all great movies, because he certainly hasn't, but we've talked about in the past guys like McConaughey and Luke Wilson who really try to go for like that leading man, just rom-com BS. And Vince Vaughn, for the most part, avoided it. Like his comedy stuff, like, Old School and Wedding Crashers, those are definitely more masculine versions of comedy with romantic pieces in there.
Yeah, I'm not impugning their talents, and I was just struck by how good looking they are in this movie.
Yeah, it's like looking at an old picture of myself, Josh.
So true.
I've gotten so far downhill. But no, I hear what you're saying. I mean, Favreau was jacked, wasn't he? He was in such good shape for this thing, and maybe it was all that swing dancing that it took to prepare for it. But can I tell you the most shocking part of your statement, Josh?
Sure.
That you hadn't seen this since 1996, man. That's crazy.
Yeah. We'll get to that in a second. I've got one more review to quote here to get the kind of grudging respect from the critics. Michael Wilmington in the Chicago Tribune said, just when you were wondering if a law could be passed barring young LA and New York movie makers from making any more films out of their barroom conversations, this little dilly proves you wrong. Economically made and ingeniously shot with a lightweight Aton 35-3 camera by director-cinematographer Doug Liman, Swingers is a great example of how cheaply to turn life into art. Swingers doesn't really add up to much except a good time, but it's smart, funny, and cute. With all that going for you, who needs to be money? I think it is worth noting there that Doug Liman was the cinematographer on this movie as well.
Yeah, I think there are a few good points in that review, and that quote was that one, this was definitely in the 90s a very, again, another subgenre, New York bar scene, LA bar scene, angsty 20-year-olds, just like in the 80s, it was we graduated high school, what are we going to do with our lives? This was the post-college, what are we going to do with our lives type thing, you know? So I like that. And I like that he credited Doug Liman, because Doug Liman did shoot this very creatively and gave it a real look, gave it a real feel. And a lot of the time, because they shot it on such a low budget, like this camera that they used is not an ideal camera to make a feature film. And they were using like short ends, which is film that is like the snipped off parts that most people don't need or haven't used. So you could usually only get 60 seconds at a time on some of those takes. So really good use and creative and effective filmmaking.
Yeah, I think visually, that was one thing that struck me about the movie, having, not seen it in all that time and coming back to it, was like, this actually is a pretty visually impressive movie. And I think honestly, maybe my favorite part of the movie is the like sort of opening, I don't know if it's the opening credits or just like the opening montage right before or after the credits of like snapshots of Hollywood life that very much feel authentic. I mean, presumably because they were authentic. They were shooting in these real bars and real hangouts where people were, often without closing them down. Because they couldn't afford to. So, I mean, it felt to me like a real honest sense of place in this movie. And that's something that Doug Liman captures almost in like a documentary sense.
Yeah, I love that, as you know, we've talked about in other episodes. And I think you can go even before that, when the Miramax kind of emblem comes up and you hear Favreau and Vaughn just kind of chattering over the, kind of the opening titles. And then you're right, you get to those credits and you get that cool montage over "You're Nobody Till Somebody Loves You," Dean Martin getting a real feel right away. But your favorite part of the movie? Come on, bro.
Like you said, I hadn't seen this movie since 1996. And much like Vince Vaughn and Jon Favreau's physiques, it has not aged well.
You're 100% wrong. Ugh. Who are you even? What are you talking about? Gross.
Well, I think, and I was trying to remember this because I think you and I might have seen this movie together in 1996. I have this memory of going with like a group of people from high school to see this movie at like the Discount Dollar Theater in 1996, but it's kind of fuzzy. So I don't know. Do you remember when you first saw it?
Yes, I do. And it was a random group of some of our friends and just some other film fans from our school that I could name, and nobody would have any knowledge of it, and you'd be like, ha ha ha, that's a name I haven't heard in a long time or thought about, But what happened was, our old drama teacher, Miss Hunnity, who used to somehow work in the industry and seemed to see every single movie, she was the one who told us about it. I remember her telling us there's this movie Swingers, and these guys talk in such a different way, and the way they say money and bunnies and babies, and it's like a whole new language, and you got to go see it. And she was the one who recommended it. And then we all went to see it, and a lot of us came out for the better, and you just stayed you.
All right. Yeah, I did. I don't think I had a class with her at that time. So I am assuming that it was probably you who told me like, hey, there's this cool movie we're going to go see and you should come see it with us. And I think I liked it at the time, but, and I didn't dislike it this time, but it feels extraordinarily dated to me, and not always in a bad way. Like I was saying, that opening montage, it gives you a real sense of what the sort of nightlife was like in Hollywood in 1996. And that is kind of fascinating. But the humor and the character relationships and that kind of stuff, I felt was pretty creaky.
Oh man,
this time around.
I totally want to get into that with you because I'm going to disagree with so much of it. But Dave here, our producer, the guy behind the guy behind the guy. What was the first time? When was the first time you saw this movie?
I don't think I saw it in the theater in '96, but I saw it many, many, many times around 99, 2000, college, basically in college all the time.
Bro, I'm the same. But in our thing, it was like if you wanted to hook up with someone, you would put this movie on, and it was kind of assumed that if you guys were watching the movie together, you wouldn't get through the entire movie. You would watch it because it put you in such a good mood, and about halfway through, you would hook up. Sorry, Josh.
Man, I've missed
I
out.
haven't seen it in college.
I've missed out on so much, apparently. I was watching Fight Club over and over again in college, so maybe that was my problem. That and Bring It On. I think those were the two movies I watched the most in college. So I don't know what that tells you about me.
I'm pretty sure that I had this poster on my wall in college, as many college students did at this point in time, you know?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I
Sure.
can see that. That along with like the Pulp Fiction poster were probably go-to college dorm room movie posters in the 90s. That absolutely makes sense to me. Well, we'll get into then potential disagreements when we come back and talk our general thoughts on Swingers. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year in this episode of our season on the films of 1996. We've been talking about Jason's personal pick, Swingers. And Jason, obviously this is a movie that you loved when you first saw it. You saw a bunch more times over the years and you still love. So take it away. What do you love about this movie?
You're right, man. And I couldn't tell you, it's been a few years since I watched it, but it's just such a pleasure, such a breeze. You talk about the humor not holding up, and I'm shocked at that. The humor is great because it's got so many funny little things, relationship humor, if you will, friendship humor, stuff like, where Mikey, played by Favreau, is constantly obsessed with his ex, and he's messing up every single situation just to constantly harp on this ex, and his friends are there for him, and they have to uplift him. And a good example of the type of humor I'm talking about is like when he and Rob are playing golf, and they both are counting their strokes, and it's clear that they got like 12, 13, and what did you get? And he's like, I got an 8. What about you? He's like, I got an 8. Just little fun things like that. And, I just really liked it. I don't know. What didn't you like about it?
Well, I think there are amusing. I'm not saying that it's not at all funny or anything like that. I think there are amusing bits. And actually that golf joke that you quoted there is one of the funnier things in it. I didn't really like the characters like as people. And I think this kind of movie, which is like a hangout movie, really relies on the idea that you want to like just spend time with these guys because there's not much of a plot. And I mean, there is a little bit of the idea that Mikey, the Jon Favreau's character, has to get over this ex and get back out there. But even that is pretty loosely defined as the movie goes on. It's really just about these guys hanging out, doing their dumb stuff, playing Nintendo hockey or whatever, and going to bar after bar after bar and party after party after party. And I just found them tiresome as people, especially Trent. And I realized Trent, the Vince Vaughn character, is meant to be a bit abrasive. He's kind of loud and rude to people at times. But I just found him so unlikable that I couldn't stand that character at all. And so I think even if you're like, okay, he's kind of a dick at times, but you have to, and Mikey is a more likable guy. He's more low key. You still have to buy into the idea that these guys are good friends and that they want to hang out together and that there's a fun dynamic between them. And again, I didn't feel that way. I think there's a slight misogynist tone running through this movie. And it's a question of like, well, is that the characters or is that the perspective of the movie? And I think it's a mix of both. And it's not necessarily impossible to depict that, but it was just one other thing that made me not really like these guys and not root for them. I wasn't rooting for them to meet women. I wasn't rooting for Mikey to get over his girlfriend. He just kind of seemed like a whiny loser. And I do think there's some nice stuff later, especially once he meets the Heather Graham character, which is basically the end of the movie, but they had the kind of dynamic that I would have hoped for from other characters earlier in the movie. And I didn't hate this movie at all, but considering how big a deal it is, how much I remembered liking it, and how much you obviously like it, I was sort of shocked at how little I liked it watching it this time.
Yeah, what a bummer that you hate fun.
Well, you already knew that about me.
Yeah, but no, look, here's what I'm going to say. I do think the relationships here are the strength. The friendships are the strength. I think those the relationships between Mikey and Trent are well drawn and Mikey and Rob are well drawn. I will agree with you that there is a misogynistic you called it an overtone, I might call it an undertone.
Yeah.
But But again, like we just got, last week talked about Kolya, and it's like, these are dudes in their 20s in the mid 90s who clearly a few of them are very straight up honest that all they want to do is bang women, right? And Mikey is the different one. He wants to do something else. So like, again, like contextually, time and place, like we've seen hundreds of movies like that where guys are like that, and that's all that they are. And I would say this is a more amusing version of that. I don't think these guys could be they can't be in their mid 20s today with that attitude, right? And you wouldn't feel good about that. But it was the mid 90s. It was a different time, and maybe a little more innocent of their, while their intentions were to sleep with women, they weren't lecherous or creepy. They were just putting themselves out there, this young macho bravado. And I think you're talking about the depth of these characters, and I'm saying in your mid 20s, how much depth do you have? They're still learning as people, and
but they are people. Like they're not just, or they should be. In a good movie, you should be able to understand them as broader than, or as deeper than just catchphrases or whatever, which is another thing.
I think you do. Yeah, I think you do. You want to get to the catchphrases. I just want to say one more thing. You mentioned Mikey's like kind of a crying little bitch about getting over his ex.
That's not my word, but yeah, okay.
Having known both you and me for a long time, we've both been crying little bitches about getting over exes before.
And I'm not saying that that's not something that you can have in a movie. And again, for me, that ultimately ended up being the most compelling thing, that eventually it gets to a point where when he's moving on and he has character growth, which Trent obviously does not, and maybe isn't supposed to. That was fine. I just felt like early in the movie, rather than rooting for Mikey to do like what Trent wants him to do, which is just go bang whoever's number he can possibly get, I wasn't rooting for either of them to succeed in what they were trying to go for. And I just found it more annoying than endearing.
But that's definitely what Trent wanted. And dude, you can't tell me maybe you can, but I can tell you as someone, who's been through breakups, I've definitely heard you got to get back out there. You got to have a slump buster, you got to get on the horse again, right? You'll feel better after you sleep with someone else. And part of that is the false or the in the minute confidence you get, because you were able to connect with someone in that way. But no, I get what you're saying. I just think it's not really true because Mikey never does that. He's fighting that the whole way. Even when he kind of goes along with what Trent wants him to do, he finds ways of messing it up. Like when they're in Vegas and they go back to the cocktail waitress's, her trailer, and Trent and she, whatever, they're going to hook up. And then Mikey's left out there with Dorothy, we'll call her, because she played a Dorothy in the MGM shows. And it looks like they're making out, and he's just saying how much he misses Michelle. And, and she says, the line I was talking about earlier, where she says, I'm sure you guys will get back together because she's just on a rebound. And he goes, yeah, but we were just on a rebound. And she goes, well, how long was the relationship before you? And she goes, 6 years. And he goes, and how long were you together? And he goes, 6 years, so just like, I think there's some really funny, poignant dialogue in there. And I do root for this. And in fact, I think it's interesting that because Mikey and Trent are the main relationship here, you would almost think that opening scene would be Mikey and Trent together, but it's Mikey and Rob kind of telling him, she's never going to call you until you move on, until you forget about her. And he goes, well, can I pretend to forget about her? And he's like, well, you can, but she'll know. She's only going to call when you actually forget about her. There's the rub. Like, that shouldn't really work, but it works because of the dynamic and the driver of this movie.
Yeah, that scene is more pleasant than any of the scenes with Trent. I mean, I think that's maybe what soured me on some of this movie, is that I just found Trent so off-putting and unpleasant to watch that I couldn't really be that entertained by the stuff that involved him. And again, I liked the movie better when he was not there, and it was about Mikey connecting with the women, or even the scenes that he has with Rob, with Ron Livingston's character, his other kind of best friend, but who's clearly not as central a character to the movie. I like that better. That golf scene that you mentioned has a nice low-key vibe to it. So I don't know. And then the catchphrases. We have to talk about the catchphrases because they fucking annoyed the hell out of me. I forgot how like oppressive the catchphrases are in this movie.
Dude, I just think again, because you're saying it's dated, and I think one of the reasons you're saying it's dated is because of those catchphrases, which at the time were new. We hadn't heard that per se before, at least not like that. But I look at it differently. I look at it as a really, really honest portrayal of a subculture in a time and a place, and like a really effective version of it. But yeah, you don't like money, you don't like the babies, you don't like Vegas, baby, you don't like any of it.
No, and I think the other thing about that is at this time, to me, not only do they say it constantly, which I found annoying, but it seems like they're trying so hard to like coin a new catchphrase. Like they say things that people didn't actually say. It's not like they're using some slang that sounds dated because it's from that time period and we don't say it anymore. They were kind of like pushing this as their thing in this movie, and it just feels really forced to me. Every time Trent says money or beautiful baby, it sounds to me like I can hear Jon Favreau typing it into the script.
And I disagree with you. I do think that this was probably the way that they talked because he wrote it in 2 weeks. So when he met, the background on money is that the old Michael Jordan commercial with Spike Lee, the Mars Blackman commercial, Spike Lee calls him money, right? And then with Favreau and Vaughn on the set of Rudy, he heard Vaughn started to like kind of describe people as money. And it's like when you're young, you say stuff like that. I remember in high school, like if someone was, cool or something smooth happened, that was butter. That was as smooth as butter. That was butter. And I remember my Spanish teacher once, at one point, she said, I was like, yeah, that was a really good thing. And she goes, es mantequilla? Like, is that butter? So, so I disagree. I think all these catchphrases, it would be like you saying that swing dancing wasn't a real thing in this subculture. Maybe you and I didn't know money and baby, but I'm pretty sure these like cats in LA in their mid-20s who probably did drive around to parties and bars every night, looking for women. And are we supposed to be impressed by them because they wear a backpack? That was a good line on Favreau.
Oh yeah, that's literally the most dated line in this movie. But to be fair, that is something that was a big trend for women to do at the time.
Yeah. Anyway, I just disagree with you. I think it was fair and honest. And I bet you Vince Vaughn, that character was not very far off from who Vince Vaughn was at the time.
No, and I think you're probably right about that. And I think it's fine for a movie to kind of invent lingo for characters. To say like, yeah, maybe this isn't realistic dialogue per se, but this is how these people talk to each other. And if you believe the movie and you believe those characters, then you can buy into that, even though maybe it's not how you talk or how you've seen other people talk. But it felt forced to me every time he said it. Every time that word came out of his mouth, it didn't feel authentic to me. And that's the writing, or maybe it's Vince Vaughn's performance, or maybe it's a mix of both. But I think that was my issue, is that I didn't think of it as something that was realistic. And then even without it being realistic, it didn't feel like something that fit organically into the movie.
No, you're wrong.
All right.
Dave, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, just to chime in real quick. I was at a party just before all this coronavirus stuff started, and people were saying money.
Really?
I mean, they were successful with this. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I really think all of this, I've also heard from, some like tackier friends calling women babies, but and stuff like that. I mean, a lot of this stuff I think stuck. I hear what you're saying, Josh, but I think that they were absolutely successful in creating kind of a weird little movie moment that kind of lived on.
I don't think it would have if it wasn't authentic, Josh. You're saying it was just pulled out of thin air. I'm saying it was natural, and this is how they were talking to each other, and it felt very natural, and that is why it kind of caught on, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think Dave is right in that this movie, I mean, obviously this was a big pop culture sensation and a movie that had a lasting resonance that we can talk about. But I mean, to me, the idea that someone might say something is money now is the equivalent of somebody doing like a Borat impression. Like, it happens,
and they do,
but
that
I don't
too.
approve of it.
You know what? I'm going to give you that one, Josh. I'll agree with that. I don't want to hear people, oh, that's so money, and it's like, but when I watch this and there's the scene where Trent and Sue are talking to Mikey in the bar and trying to get his confidence up, and they're like, "You're so money and you don't even know. You're like this bear with these claws. What are you gonna do with these claws?" I thought it was great. It was a hilarious motivational speech back then, and it still held up as like I think it really happened. And if you do the reading on the the background of the script, I think that scene in particular was one that actually was based on a real situation with him and Vince Vaughn.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I'm harping on the negatives here, but there are things that I like about this movie. I mean, I mentioned the sense of place, and it's not just in that opening montage. I mean, throughout the movie, all the bars and the parties that they go to and the way they talk about Hollywood bars and nothing has a sign. And actually, especially the swing dance culture, which is the thing in this movie that is extremely dated, but it feels like a glimpse into some particular moment that was happening in that time. And I think it's done really, really effectively. So I liked all of that about it. I liked eventually the relationship that, the character growth that Mikey goes through, and the way in the kind of second to last scene where he doesn't want to talk to his ex-girlfriend anymore. When Heather Graham calls him on the phone, he wants to talk to her. I thought that was really effectively done. I thought they had a really sweet dynamic that is missing. She's the only female character in the movie who has like any like sliver of dimension or agency to her. And I liked that. I think Heather Graham is kind of an underrated actor. So I liked that about the movie, the use of the music, not only in the swing dance scenes, but the idea that they have this kind of big band swing music throughout, I thought was good. And the Vegas stuff, we're here in Las Vegas, and I think we have to acknowledge that even though the Vegas aspect of this movie is a really small aspect of it, it had a kind of outsized influence on how people perceive Vegas. And I think it's done nice things for Vegas here.
Yeah, well, Vegas Baby, people definitely still say that. So,
they do. There was a movie called Vegas Baby, which is a very, very, very bad movie. But
yeah, the Vegas sequence, which takes place about 10 minutes in, where we're going to Vegas, you're 2 down, we're going to Vegas. That sequence is kind of like an early rocket booster. It kind of takes this movie to the next level, and we definitely see their failures, like as trying to be cool, like when they go up to the table and first they say, I got Mikey says, I got 300. I'm only going to bet 100. So of course he says he's going to bet 300, and he gets 3 chips back. Do you have anything smaller? And he's like, yes, but you'd have to play at a table where the $100 minimum isn't the buy-in, So funny stuff there. Obviously, one of my favorite says we can get breakfast anytime. I'll have pancakes in the Age of Enlightenment. That's a fun one from back in the day.
Yeah.
But I do agree, besides the friendships and that time of sense and place in LA, which I think was a very honest kind of look at it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. One other thing I liked was the way they showed Mike continue to fail, right? We mentioned that, he was left alone with the one in Vegas, and he could have hooked up with her, and he's, instead like more worried about using his calling card, which there's something dated.
Right.
To see if he's got any messages on his machine from his ex. Trent tells this amazing story about an audition, and the women are enraptured, and he just follows it up with, yep, we all have stories. And then of course the answering machine sequences, which are great, almost iconic. The first one where the answering machine is talking to Mikey because he gets messages just from his friends. Did she call yet? Blah, blah, blah. And then his grandma, we all miss you. Are you coming back anytime soon? And then, as he turns it off, the answering machine, which is based on a Jeff Garlin bit I read, says, you have to move on. There are plenty of fish in the sea, right? It's a funny bit. But then I think the second answering machine bit is even more effective when he meets Nikki at a bar and gets her number, and, Trent and Sue say, call her in like 3 days. So of course he calls her like that night at 3 a.m. or whatever. And he says, I just wanted to call to say, how you doing? And, he gets cut off by her machine, and then it just goes on and on. Like, I just want to leave my number, and now you have it. And so call me. And then, look, I got to be honest. He calls back again. I just got out of something. It's like, it's not you, it's me. It just very funny stuff, I think.
Yeah, that scene, that second sort of answering machine scene where he keeps calling her and like just digs himself deeper and deeper into this hole every time he calls back, until finally she picks up the phone on the last one and says, please don't ever call me again. That's a really effective scene. I think so. And it does show him. I mean, it shows him as kind of a loser, but in a way that illustrates the character growth that he's going to go through, that he has to be able to let go of all those insecurities that he's dealing with related to his ex-girlfriend, that he's kind of finally able to do when he meets Lorraine, the Heather Graham character. So yeah, I like that. I mean, there are plenty of things about this movie that I do like. And I do like the Vegas stuff. It's cool that, that they did that at a time when maybe younger people going to Vegas wasn't as much of a thing. I think this, along with like The Real World or whatever, which was, I don't remember exactly, it was a few years later, but I think this movie actually had a big influence on the idea that like Vegas was a cool place for like young hipsters to come. So I certainly appreciate that. I wanted to ask you, as a stand-up comedian, did you believe Mikey's character as a comedian?
Well, we never really heard him do any comedy. He just said he was a comedian, right? So,
right.
Like, so I it's almost like an afterthought. He hosts an open mic at basically, what do they call it? The Ha Ha Hut, which might be, the Ha Ha Cafe in North Hollywood or something like that. Or it could be as something like the Hamburger Hamlet in West LA, who knows? But I think it was, I know what you're saying, because we never see him on stage, and all we see is like this down kind of brooding guy who comes off more as like a writer. But I don't know. It's almost to me like I didn't even consider him a stand-up comedian or not. It was irrelevant.
Yeah, I mean, it is irrelevant to the story, but he mentions it like a lot.
A few times, yeah.
Yeah. And I just, every time I was like, I can't imagine this character like ever telling a joke. Like it just didn't. I mean, I think it's smart. And I know you and I have talked about this, the idea that like you make a movie about like a stand-up comedian, especially starring an actor or written and directed by people who aren't stand-up comedians, and you show them on stage telling jokes and it's always very unconvincing.
Oh, it is not good.
Yeah. So it's smart that they don't show that, but just the character as a person doesn't seem like somebody who would tell jokes on stage.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, like we know that Favreau spent time at the Improv Olympic in Chicago. So my guess is it was probably easier for him to say he's a stand-up than an improv actor. Like at the time that wasn't really a big thing,
Right.
So I can understand that. But one other thing I wanted to mention was I really love that last scene on the phone where Lorraine calls him. He's thinking about calling her and he's going to wait, and she calls him. And then, of course, that's when Michelle, the ex, calls, and they start talking. He's like, "Can I call you back?" And she says, "I'm going out of town for a week, and can we just talk now?" And he says, "Nah, I'll call you when you get back into town." And they hang up. And as they're hanging up, she says, "I love you," and he doesn't either hear or care. And I think that was the original ending of the movie. And I think that would have been a very effective ending of the movie. And then you have that kind of like postscript moment where it's Mikey and Trent at the diner and they're talking, and Trent sees the woman playing those crazy baby games and giving him this vibe. So he's giving her this wacky vibe back, and she's actually just trying to entertain her infant child, which is a funny bit. But I kind of think that the ending on the phone might have been the perfect ending.
I agree with you. I think that phone scene, and like I was saying, that's a great scene to illustrate that character growth. I like that scene a lot. It feels authentic, and it feels like the story has gotten itself to like a nice stopping point. And then I do think that last, like, not only do I think that would have been a better ending, but I think that last scene with them in the diner and the baby is just really dumb and not funny. And it left me sort of like with a bad impression at the end of the movie, where right before that I had a nice impression, like, oh, this is kind of closing out on a nice note, and then it just throws this dumb joke at you and a reminder of like, oh, remember Trent? He's kind of an immature dick, and that's how the movie ends. So yeah, I wasn't crazy about that ending, but I do agree that that scene on the phone is really well done, and that's part of what I like the most about the movie.
All right, well, yeah, man. I mean, we've kind of covered this. They go through the nightlife. Nothing's ever good enough in a bar or a party, so they're always looking for the next thing. I could totally relate to that. I will say I was shocked at the amount of wallet chains in this film. That was a little off-putting.
Yeah, there's a lot of I mean, it's the 1996 movie through and through. There's all the wallet chains that you could ever imagine are in this movie.
And then one other little thing I wanted to say is that poster. I looked at it recently, online, and I thought the marketing was so incorrect for this movie. Right? The slogans they had were "cocktails first, questions later," which no, and also especially today, no.
Yeah.
And the other one was "get a nightlife," which was, can we just do anything? Maybe just anything.
Yeah,
So,
those are not great marketing taglines, but it didn't matter because it became a huge, success anyway.
Right, and that's what I'm saying is I think that's part of it is like even the marketing team probably didn't understand this was such a different world, So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. I like we mentioned the golf scene and like they're totally missing and they yell stuff like "get there" as if the ball has any chance of. Those little subtle things I really enjoyed. So
yeah,
I'm ready to rate it if you are, Josh.
Yeah. Out of big bad voodoo daddies.
Yeah, we can rate it out. Or I was going to say swing dances. So
whatever, however you like. It.
I give it 4.5 swing dances, baby. It's still money, and it knows it.
It does know it. That is a true thing about this movie. It's very taken with itself.
Self-referential.
Yes. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. It was mildly entertaining to me this time. So that's about the
Would
best
you
I can do.
walk more than 3 blocks to see it?
Man, you know me. I'm not into walking. So probably
you
not.
wouldn't fit in well with these guys.
Yeah.
Just drive everywhere in their separate cars, even though they're all going to the same place.
Right. And they all have the club. That was another thing I noticed. I didn't realize the club was such a big deal in 1996.
I think that those were hilarious points. Is like they're all going out together, yet they all drive and meet each place. That's such a LA thing, and I think the club is probably too, because probably wasn't as big, in Chicago or New York, although maybe it should have been. Dave, when was the last time you saw the movie?
It's been a while. I watched a bunch of clips this morning getting ready for this, but yeah, it's been a long time. I've seen it at least a dozen, maybe 24 times though.
Wow.
So you're probably with me then.
Yeah, it's up there, maybe a 4.5. I'd have to rewatch it to really say. Yeah, I loved it back in the day.
And I mentioned a lot of the Mikey lines, but Josh, Trent has a lot of hilarious lines too, even though you don't think so.
No, I don't think so. Well, let's then take a break and come back to talk about the legacy of swingers. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode on the films of 1996, we've been talking about Jason's pick, Swingers, a movie that Jason loves, that Dave loves, that I didn't love. But it's undeniable that this movie is incredibly influential. And we talked a little bit about some of these aspects. Of course, Vince Vaughn and Jon Favreau, this launched them into massive careers that are continuing on to this day. Jason, as you're mentioning, Steven Spielberg kind of scouted Vince Vaughn out of this to cast him in The Lost World, the Jurassic Park sequel. And then he went on to have kind of an up and down career. There was a time when he was a massive movie star, and I think he's kind of down to being a sort of mid-level movie star now. And I think he's had some substance abuse issues maybe. But he's had a pretty steady career and worked a lot with an actor that we talked about in a recent episode, Owen Wilson.
Yeah, and he's made some interesting choices. Like, he was in that go-to A-list of comedy stars probably in the early 2000s with him and Owen Wilson and Ben Stiller and Will Ferrell, and you get your Wedding Crashers and your Old Schools and Anchorman he's very good in. But, and Favs obviously became one of the biggest directors and producers in Hollywood, right?
Yes.
So I was looking up both their filmographies and I wanted to mention, I was like, are there any things that we might have skipped? Like, Jon Favreau, because he's so big in the Marvel universe and now the Mandalorian, which that's his baby, as the producer, do we even remember that he made Elf, which is a great movie?
Elf is a great movie. Yeah, Elf is a much better movie than this.
Mm-hmm.
I love the dark comedy, Very Bad Things from the late 90s. I would have to watch it again, but I remember liking it back then.
I remember liking it too, and I think you and I saw that together in the theater, and that's a movie that I haven't seen since then, and if you look at commentary, people hate that movie with such a strong passion that I'd have to wonder about how I'd feel about it going back to it now.
that would just make me want to watch it more.
Yeah.
But and then Fav's, of course, PCU from even before this time. I think he was in that.
God. Yes. I remember I saw PCU at a test screening in LA where we got to fill out the comment cards afterwards before it was released. And that was very, an exciting experience for like my 12-year-old or 13-year-old self or whatever.
So on the flip side, Vince Vaughn, he had this kind of A-list career that we mentioned, but he also did some weird movies, The Cell, Clay Pigeons. He was just in Seaburg this past year. And then, Dave and I always like him from the Craig Zoller movies, Brawl in Cell Block 99, stuff like that, where he's just in these gritty, like, white guy on tough times, son of a bitch who gets into horrible fights with people.
Yeah, I think that's maybe one of the reasons that he works with Craig Zoller. He's also known for being kind of a political conservative, I think, although he doesn't tout that, but that's something that maybe informs some of his opportunities, perhaps. But I feel like Vince Vaughn can be very like, he can be a good like character actor who dives into those parts, especially those kind of semi-sleazy guys. I think Dave and I both recently saw the movie Arkansas, where he plays like a drug kingpin, and he does a good job in that. But I think he can also be really like grating and annoying if he plays a character who's meant to be likable, but he kind of plays it with that sleazy energy. And I think that's when I like him less, maybe in broad comedies, and I enjoy him more in those darker either dark comedies or dramas. I think he works better in those.
You might be right. Like I remember, I'd have to watch it again, but I liked Thumbsucker. He was good in that. He's good at making things better than they are on paper when there isn't much to the character. Like he was in this season of Curb Your Enthusiasm, and obviously he's working with great material there, but he did a very good job of like, playing a Funkhauser, Josh. So I thought that was good. The one other movie that I want to mention, I liked the two other Jon Favreau directed movies that he starred in, which were Made, which, he and Vince Vaughn reteamed, and then Chef. And Chef kind of had a zeitgeist moment too, a huge pop cultural influence. So it's kind of interesting that he was able to make two of those things and 20 years apart, and they were both so huge in their own ways.
Yeah, he's had a weird, like, varied influence on pop culture. And like you were saying, he's like one of the architects of the whole like Star Wars universe at this point. And he was one of the early architects of the Marvel universe, directing the first two Iron Man movies. So it's you would not ever have imagined that for him from watching this, or even from watching Made, or even from watching Chef, which I hate that movie, Chef. But you're right, it was a huge pop culture sensation. You want to talk about self-congratulatory? That is the most smug self-congratulatory movie I may have ever seen.
I liked it, and now they have a TV show, those two, on Netflix. So.
I like it too.
Yeah, I think he's probably better. I haven't seen that show, but I think that's just a documentary show rather than a narrative, right. And I think that's probably a better approach for him on that food tip.
Yeah, but honestly, I had mentioned in the first segment, I used to love Dinner for Five, where it was him and four other people in the entertainment industry, and they would just sit around telling Hollywood stories while they ate dinner. And there's this great story that he told once about, I think he was auditioning for the Shawshank Redemption. And Josh, you had mentioned that his body type changes, shall we say?
Yeah.
So he was the character he was auditioning for was named Fat Ass, and he knew it, and he's like, this is just insulting. So he decided to like play a joke on the casting assistant. So he went up to the desk and he said, yeah, I'm here to audition for the role of Fatus. And like she's like, what? He's like, yeah, Fatus, it says it right here. And he kept saying it until she corrected him and made sure that he knew it was for Fat Ass, which I thought was funny. Lastly, on these two, before we move on, Josh,
yeah,
The Breakup's a damn good movie. Somewhat lost in time. I really like that film.
Yeah, a lot of people do. I remember not really liking it, but I do like Peyton Reed, the director. I feel like he's done a lot of good stuff. As I just mentioned, Bring It On earlier in this episode.
And Marvel, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's also worked with Marvel, the Ant-Man movies, which I think are a lot of fun. So that might be something for me to revisit. I was also just, as you were talking about Jon Favreau's physique, I was remembering he also had that weird period where he was like, wanted to be like an MMA fighter, and he had that guest starring arc on Friends where he played an MMA fighter. He's he's gone in so many unexpectedly weird directions in his career.
Did he really want to be an MMA fighter? I knew that character, but I didn't know that he was.
I think, and I'd have to look this up now because it just occurred to me, but I think it was partially based on, maybe he didn't want to be an MMA fighter, but he got really into the whole subculture and kind of immersed himself in it and like trained himself to the point where maybe he could have been an MMA fighter.
Yeah, and you could have seen him making a movie about that, like,
yes,
before it exploded. I could have seen that. So,
right.
Look, Ron Livingston, a constantly working actor. Heather Graham, constantly working. Nikki, played by Brooke Langton, right? She works all the time. A lot of these, and Alex Desert, Becker. Who doesn't love Becker?
Becker, yeah.
But a lot of these people are working constantly. Like when it was Dave's pick in 2007, and we talked about the 10 and how the basically everyone in the state is pretty much working. Like there is a massive success rate of people who have come out of this and none of us knew before, who are working regularly, nonstop, still, very vital to the industry.
Yeah, and I think both Ron Livingston and Heather Graham are kind of underrated as actors. They do a lot of lower profile, lower budget films. I just saw Heather Graham as the star of an indie film called The Rest of Us that was just came out on VOD a few months ago. And she's rarely like the lead of anything anymore, but she did a really good job in that movie. That's kind of this understated melancholy comedy. But I like them both. I think they're both good actors and maybe deserve better parts in what they do currently.
Well, I think Livingston gets a lot of stuff. I mean, he does a lot of good TV stuff. Boardwalk Empire. He had a good run on Sex and the City.
Yeah.
And then, of course, one underrated film that we both like, I think, is Joe Swanberg's Drinking Buddies, which he's in,
Yeah, I do like that movie a lot.
So I just wanted to say one more thing about Ron Livingston. It's pretty cool to have this and Office Space on your resume. Two iconic, very important 90s indie movies that have lived on in much larger fashions.
Yeah, both those movies incredibly influential. So I guess we got to talk about Doug Liman, who used this as a jumping off point to direct a lot of big blockbustery type things, including the first Bourne Identity movie and Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise, which I think is a fun, underrated movie, although it's maybe not underrated anymore because it has a lot of critical acclaim. But he is very uneven and he's made some really bad movies, including stuff like Jumper. But I think most importantly, we have to mention that Doug Liman worked with Jason Harris on the film Go, which was his follow-up to Swingers.
This is true. I was actually, I think it was Miss Honeydee, our old drama teacher, who told me to go down to a casting office and see if I could get cast. And our old friend Jake and I got cast in a wedding scene. He was the groom and I was the best man. And you can see us on screen. I would be unrecognizable, thin and blonde hair. But Josh, what's funny about that is we met this guy. I remember his name. His name was Ren, W-R-E-N. And Jake, myself, and Ren, after our night of filming with Doug Liman, went out to a diner and talked about our Hollywood dreams, man. So yeah. I don't even think we knew. I mean, I didn't know it was Doug Liman until a little bit later. I had to put it together. It might have been when I saw the MTV award and I was like, oh, that guy was the guy who just directed the thing I was, doing, which is really a big story for an extra. I'm really going all out here saying how much I knew.
No, you were very visible in that one scene. You are very noticeable.
Yeah, that's true. So, but it's kind of fitting that we went out and had that kind of moment of talking about our aspirations of acting and whatnot. So Liman, yeah, I think, but Bourne Identity, was another one of these movies, and Edge of Tomorrow also were they caught on more afterwards. Bourne Identity was huge on in the video store days, and Edge of Tomorrow obviously a little different with how distribution has changed, but he's in a way that's kind of cool that he makes movies that find their audience later on. He's a little ahead of what people are thinking some of the time. And then, yeah, he makes Looper and nobody thinks they want that.
Not Looper, Jumper. Don't make sure we
right.
don't want to.
Looper's awesome.
Yeah, Looper is good.
Yeah, Jumper's horrible.
Doug Liman has, and he's made other bad movies. I can't remember. There was one movie that he made a few years ago that's about a soldier trapped behind a wall. And it's one of these small 2-character movies where he's just got to figure out a way to escape someone who's shooting at him. And I can't remember who the star of it is. And I feel like I'm poorly describing this, but it's not good. And
I don't know that one, but he's made some pretty huge blockbusters too,
Yes, he has. And so I mean he's had a successful did he direct Mr. and Mrs. Smith with
Yeah.
Angelina Jolie? That's a fun movie as well.
Yeah. And also, the OC. He was very influential in the OC.
Him and Mick G. That's like quite the confluence of 90s directors working on that
Except
show.
Liman's still doing cool things, I think.
That's true. Yeah, he's had a better career overall than Mick G has.
And, when we're talking about the ups and downs, he had that show Heist, which was like about the biggest bank robberies ever that was supposed to break out and never went anywhere. But one show I really liked that he was director and exec producer on was I Just Want My Pants Back on MTV, which only lasted a season and was probably too smart for MTV at the time.
Yeah, I don't know that I watched that, but I mean, the other thing about Liman is that he has a reputation of being kind of a monster on set and being difficult to deal with. And there's some movies, even some of his most successful movies, where you read these stories like on Bourne Identity or on Go, where it's like, oh, there was a producer or a screenwriter who really stepped in and did most of the actual directing. And I don't know if any of that is really true, but he certainly has that kind of a reputation. And you wonder, because his career is so uneven, that you have to maybe wonder a little bit about the movies that he made that were good. Was it really another creative force who was like behind what was good about that? And you could even say that about Swingers. Like, was it really Jon Favreau who was the one who made this movie good?
I understand that, but it's a collaborative medium and he has a good track record. I never really heard that he was a monster. I've definitely heard that he's eccentric and maybe people have to step in to get the work done for him.
Yeah, maybe that was an exaggeration, not to say a monster, but that he has a difficult reputation. Did you find him difficult to work with on Go, Jason?
I mean, Josh, what's he going to do to me? I mean, he knows how to treat a star, baby.
Yes.
But, look, let's get to the next big thing, which was the swing revival.
Yes,
right?
yes.
This was the number one cause of the swing revival, I think.
It makes it sound like it's a commercial for some sort of medication. Like,
no,
we can cure the number one cause of the swing revival.
Well, I mean, it was happening in little pockets, Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, Cherry Poppin' Daddies, and Squirrel Nut Zippers, Royal Crown Review, which we saw in The Mask, which we talked about.
Yeah, I think it's amazing that we've talked about two swing revival 90s movies on this podcast.
Yeah, the two biggest.
But like you said, this made Vegas a cool place. This introduced catchphrases like money and stuff like that. It also popularized the term wingman, And
oh, really?
Yeah, I had read that. And then the swing revival, for better or worse, was a highly popularized by swingers and people seeing Johnny Favs and Heather Graham dance to Big Bad Voodoo Daddy.
That is true.
Just you and me and the bottle makes three tonight.
Yeah, I remember.
Go, Daddy, go.
When I was a freshman in college, we had two big on-campus concerts a year, and one of them was Big Bad Voodoo Daddy. That was the big deal for us as freshmen at Old Amherst College in 1998.
And not far from there, I remember maybe a year later, I went to Tufts, which was a neighboring college, and their big draws that year, there was a three headliners, Josh. Sugar Hill Gang, little throwback hip hop. Ben Folds, not with the 5 anymore, but still playing the jams. And the Cherry Poppin' Daddies with their Zoot Suit Riot.
The other big concert on campus my freshman year was Ben Folds. So he was all over the place in the late 90s.
I mean, honestly, I think out of all of those, like I kind of like that Squirrel Nut Zipper song that came out. And then I could still listen to Brian Setzer Orchestra, but that's because, I like that kind of rockabilly and Stray Cats.
Yeah, well, he had a career going before this, and I think that helped him. Those other bands were really just like they had the tiny little moment. Although I think they're mostly still around. I think the Squirrel Nut Zippers play in Vegas fairly frequently.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, look, we haven't been out in a while, but.
And when we finally return to going out again, it will be to see swing revival bands from the 90s.
There's a hotel out here that they have swing dance classes all the time. The Thunderbird Lounge has it all the time. So it's not what it was, but I think that's part of why this is so much fun, this movie, seeing all that stuff. So I think the only other shout out we want to give is to Marty and Elaine at the Dresden, the musical act, who played there every week. Those kind of cool bars. And the Dresden, I think, is still there, but the Derby got bulldozed and turned into a bank. So if that doesn't tell you about where LA is now, I don't know what will.
Yeah.
And 2 of those soundtracks went gold, man. So that's pretty much all I got here, Josh.
All right. Well, I'm tapped out as well. So that is Swingers, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can swing on over to our social media accounts.
Boom, this guy, huh? I'm at Jason.
He is so money, and he doesn't even know it.
Yeah, he's like a big bad bear. He's got these claws. I'm Jason Harris Comedy on Facebook and Twitter. Facebook and Instagram. J Harris Comedy on Twitter, where I did tweet Jon Favreau today to ask him if he ever thought about making a sequel to this movie now. What would these characters look like today? I wonder. I'd probably enjoy it. Josh doesn't like anything.
True.
My website, Go for Jason. I'm going to say it's 83% right now, but just stick with us, guys. We're getting there. We're at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram. Josh, go.
Go. You can find me at joshbellhateseverything.com, Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, and at Signal Bleed on Twitter. And listen to our producer David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
You know what, guys? I usually plug Piecing It Together, but because me and my buddy Q used to watch Swingers all the time before going out every night back in Las Vegas in the early 2000s, I'm going to plug our other podcast, Bird Road, that Q and I do together. It's politics and culture and all kinds of stuff like that. So listen to Bird Road.
Were you single then, Dave?
Maybe at times.
Were you trying?
I don't remember.
Were you trying to get some beautiful babies, Dave? Because I don't know that side of you.
Possibly.
So.
Yeah, that side of me is long gone.
We've only known the settled down domestic version of Dave.
Which is what I think at least one of these characters would look like in the sequel that I'm drawing in my mind.
That you're just now writing in your mind? Yeah. So Jason, what do we have on our next episode?
Hey, Josh, this is a movie that I know we've both seen before and both really liked, but have maybe not revisited in a long time. I certainly haven't, so I'm excited to see how it holds up. The 1996 Sundance winner is Welcome to the Dollhouse by Todd Solondz.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting one to revisit. So tune in next time for Welcome to the Dollhouse. Thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
And all points west.